that you are a documentary filmmaker. You have because I've been watching through them, you have a range of really fascinating movies, which I think are unique and often very brave, very personally brave of you to make them. Very creative. I've been in the cinema with you recently watching your new film, Vanishing Love Story. And I just want to understand your filmmaking style, which I've got to, as well. You've had quite a bit of recognition. We had the recent the Excellence in Filmmaking from Inward, the film festival, and also you had Belly Talkers at the Sundance Film Festival. And I just learned about this. That, am I saying this right? Lewis Sudler Prize for your first one, Sharp Edges.
Correct.
Which what a wonderful thing. So I guess the first thing I'm going to ask you is, as I was watching your movies in particular, I'm thinking of A World Within and Belly Talkers. So these are drawing on your own kind of life and your family, which is very fascinating. And the word that comes across to me is eccentricity. It's like a big part of it. Is eccentricity, I guess in those films in particular, something you were conscious of exploring? Is it, and do you think it's an important part of being a filmmaker and your filmmaking, that sort of arty, high level, sort of ironic look at life? Is that something you were going for?
That's such a expansive first question. First of all, I'm so glad that we're doing this, because as I was telling you before we started recording, is that I love having not in person, but I love having direct communication with my colleagues who are also interested in film. I love it when somebody is interested in my work. But just, over the years that we have been teaching together, even though we haven't taught together, just, having certain discussions, I remember the first time you came into my classroom and we had a discussion about the difference between black and white and color photography and sort of, the implications of that aesthetically and our belief in the photograph itself. So I think these are discussions that you can't replicate any other way than just, one-on-one having these kind of conversations. So I really, I appreciate that you wanted to do this kind of a format. And it also forces me to take a look at not only at my work, but how my work is perceived.
Yeah.
So the idea that you would start with, eccentricity, and my thought into it, I guess I have to back up just a little bit by saying, and I've been thinking about this, when I was a kid and people asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said I wanted to be a memory maker. Now, I had no idea what that job description actually was, or, what it would entail, or, how one puts that on one's resume. But I loved the idea. I remember my dad would tell us stories of, like, we called him, tell us stories about the olden days. Mm-hmm. Right. Which was meaning before we were born. Yeah, and I was very, very, very conscious of, oh my God, I want to have things in my life. I want to have experiences and adventures in my life that are interesting enough that one day somebody's going to ask me, tell me about the olden days. Mm-hmm. So, and film very, very much is like memory, right? You choose to express some things, you choose to repress other things. Yes. And so in a way, I guess I have become a memory maker. Now, getting to, like, what memories are worth telling. So certainly I have had the childhood and have looked for things to be interesting and unique to make those memories, right? But everybody's what appears to be eccentric to the rest of the world is each individual's normal. So, I have had people watch the film A World Within, which is a short about my mother's passion for 1/12 scale miniatures and the stories that live within these 1/12 scale miniatures. She builds them to the story. The story doesn't come out of what she finds in the house, right? Or in the environment that she creates. And another one of my colleagues actually pointed out to me that they said this is the genesis of your filmmaking. You got your filmmaking from your mother's miniature passion.
Yeah.
And which is kind of interesting because then before I even made that film, I as a kid, one of the things that I did was I got very heavily involved in ventriloquism. And ventriloquism, does come out of, in some ways, my mother's disappointment that I did not play with girly girl dolls. I thought, well, I don't want to play with girly girl dolls, but if I have a doll that I can make talk and, that is much more interesting to me, and also in ventriloquism, I see, actually, Alec, you told me I didn't think I was going to go on and on like this. I hope that I'm answering your question.
This is good.
But if you think about ventriloquism, it has also a direct connection to filmmaking, because when we watch a screen, we see lips moving on the screen, but that is not where the sound is actually coming from. And ventriloquism in and of itself is not an audio illusion, it is a visual illusion. And so when you see the mouth moving, you say, okay, that is where the sound is coming from, which is exactly the same as ventriloquism.
It gave me a sort of sense of nostalgia, because in there you cut in clips of various like television and historic ventriloquists, and it gave me that sense of history and that sense of filmic performance. It made me think of like stop motion animation, like Jason the Argonauts and all that sort of real world pre-computery stuff.
Well, yes, I mean, it is very much of an analog type of illusion, right? There's no CGI involved, and it even goes back really much further. They think that in ventriloquism, they think that it was something that was taught at the Temple of Karnak. And if you, as is expressed by Ron Lucas in my movie, Moses, before he was Moses, was an Egyptian prince who was able to, train at the Temple of Karnak, which then, if they taught ventriloquism, it gives you a whole different spin on the burning bush when, for the 10 Commandments. And then to take it even further is that when the 10 Commandments were made by Cecil B. DeMille and Charlton Heston goes to the burning bush,
Amazing.
It was actually Charlton Heston who played the voice of God.
Wow, this is another level. The ventriloquist reading of the 10 Commandments, which I now have. That's really wonderful. I was so interested when you said about the dolls and your mother, and sort of appeasing your mother in some way. So has your sort of sense of self through your mother's eyes shaped your career, like the things that you want to do? Is she the prime audience for you?
Well, she's definitely one of them. She's also the subject of, the world within film. Yes. So, so I have spent a lot of time thinking about viewer and, I mean, it's interesting because in many, many ways, and, and my mother is also in Belly Talkers, and you really see her relationship with my puppet Juanito. And I think it's very clear to the audience that in some ways, she relates to Juanito much better than she relates to me. And I think that, part of her impetus for loving this miniature house and community that she created was because it gave her a sense of control in a world that was, as a director has control over the world that they are creating in cinema, gave her a sense of whole, controlling the world, having all of the scandals be as salacious or as rectified in the end as she wanted them to be. And it's interesting that she would use the stories that she created in that to teach adult Spanish classes. And she had her students so hooked into what was going on, almost like a telenovela. She had her students so hooked into serially what was happening in in the house, that she literally, when she had a wedding for the dolls, she had her students come, and these were students who had been in the class hearing about this created world for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much Spanish they learned, but they really learned a lot about storytelling in her class. And when I finished the film, I took it to a film festival, and there was a Q&A, and there was a very old man sitting in the very back of the audience, and he raised his hand, and they called on him, and he said, "Oh my God, how do you know this woman?" And I said, well, it, in fact, she's somebody that I, that I've known all my life. And they said, "Really? How close were you to her?" And I said, "Well, in fact, she's my mother." And they said, "Well, what was it like growing up with her?" And I said, "Well, there's a reason why there's a therapist thanked in the credits." But it gets back to that idea of, was I looking to make films that were eclectic? No, she's my mother. This is what I grew up with. This was part of the world.
I think it's interesting that the sort of sense of control and ordering things. I feel like writing for me is maybe the same as filmmaking. You want to compartmentalize things and create something and go, that's done, and now I can get to the next strange element of life and box that and say that perfectly and move on to the next.
Yes.
And it's such an interesting life, Sandra. So I'm going to ask you about certain things. So I want to ask you about sharp edges. So originally, were you in a film program, or you decided to make it as a film? Am I right?
Yes. So I was an undergraduate at Yale University that did not have a film program, and I had actually grown up with Tonya Harding, and we took ice skating lessons from the same coach. And so I was one of we're 6 years apart. So I was one of the big kids when she was one of the little kids. I met her when she was 3. And so I get to Yale and became an American Studies major.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved, American culture. And of course, that was my way of being able to, I think that cinema is probably America's greatest export, and certainly one that defines what other people at least think about our culture. They get through the movies, right? So I was very, very interested in that. And I didn't want to write. You have to write a thesis to get out of Yale. And it's like to be let out of jail, right? And so but I had started taking classes with the filmmaker Michael Romer, famous for Nothing But a Man, and he really just became a great inspiration and a great mentor to me. And so I said, "Listen, I want to make a film. I want to make a documentary film." And he said, "Well, what do you want to make a documentary film about?" And I didn't really have, conscious in my mind at the time. And I said, "Well, I'm thinking I wanted to do something important, right? And scholarly."
Mm-hmm.
The only way I was going to get Yale to agree to it. And so I said, "Well, I want to make a movie about the New Haven homeless." And he looked at me and sort of rolled his eyes and said, "Sandra, what do you know about the New Haven homeless?" And I said, I know nothing. And he's like, "Well, then you better find something else."
Mm-hmm.
And so I had gone home, it was my junior year. I had gone home for Christmas, the winter break, and I had lunch with Diane, my skating coach, and we were talking about Tonya because I had been following her career and how she was doing, and she was just 15 at the time. And the coach said to me, "We're really looking for some sponsorship for Tonya." And I was telling her all about my film class, and then I said, I could help make a sizzle reel for Tonya, and and you could use it. And she was like, oh, that's great. And I said, but you know what? I probably would have to make it more substantial in terms of a documentary in order for me to get class credit for it. And she was like, oh yeah, she's like, that would be fine. If you could cut the sizzle reel for us, that would be good. So I go back to New Haven, all excited that, because and nationals were going to be held. Her first national competition was going to be held in New York. So I was all working out location wise. And I went to the committee of study, and I said, this is what I want to do. And they were just implementing the film studies program my junior year. So if I double majored, I could get both degrees, but I couldn't, I wouldn't to be able to do just film studies. So I said, look, I want to do it as a combined double major. This is the American dream. This is going the distance. And they were like, no, Sandra, we don't accept film as a thesis. You have to write. I mean, Yale basically thought of filmmaking like VCR repair, that it was like, a vocational school or something. And it wasn't cerebral enough for them.
Well, film studies has always had this legitimacy problem, and it's sort of, I think it sort of plateaued, and now it's completely out of the box. But I think for a long time
and also they've changed the name too. It's not just film. It's now it's film and media studies. So
yeah. And when they added the and television on and departments and things, and it's sort of this progression, but definitely a problem. So you were part of this change.
Basically Yale just kept saying no to me, and I just kept going back. I mean, I was tenacious about it. And so finally they said to me, Sandra, if we allow you to do this, will you leave us alone? And I said I would if, I need a little money to buy the tapes to make it. And so they gave me a little money, like $700. And I made the movie. And then it was the first time that a film at graduation won the Louis Sudler Prize in the Performing and Creative Arts, to sort of bring it back to what you asked me. So it was a huge change for you. Yeah, it was the first time a film had been recognized as part of the Performing and Creative Arts. And for me, it was like, and by a woman filmmaker. So I was pretty, that's why I always include that, whenever I talk about Sharp Edges, I always want to include that award because of the change that it meant.
What a wonderful little history that is. And there's so many goals there all in one. Okay. So you recently, let's come up to contemporary work, Vanishing a Love Story. To me, so I watched Vanishing a Love Story, and it is, I found it very moving, strangely uplifting, and also very emotional. Like, it kind of made me feel very emotional, and it's almost like a reflection point. It forces you, the audience, I thought, to have a reflection point on life. Do you think that was it a different type of filmmaking for you? For me, it stands apart a little bit from other things you've made, and it's kind of its own thing. Were you conscious of trying to do something different with Vanishing a Love Story?
No, actually. In that I didn't have to use myself in the way that I have used myself in the past, but I did have to use but the reason that I was allowed to do it is because Kai Emmons, the subject of the film, she had seen the film that I had made, That Way Madness Lies, about my family and my brother, and which is, quite harrowing and talks about things that is not normally talked about in polite conversation, kind of like death. And so she thought that if I had the wherewithal and the stomach to withstand what it would take to film it, that I was so the right person to do it. And her, and she really called the shots. I mean, this is a woman who had gone to NYU Film School, and she had won a Student Academy Award. So she knew she, in some ways, knew what she was getting into, which is very different than a lot of my subjects. They don't know what they're getting into.
One second, Sandra, there's noise. As you can hear, there's noise in my background.
Oh, I don't hear it?
I'm going to edit this perfectly, but just one
Sure,
second.
sure. Yeah. Were you able to see That Way Madness Lies?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I mean, it's not that different from That Way Madness Lies in the sense of really putting, there's a lot of grit in that, and grit and grace that need to sort of walk hand in hand. But in That Way Madness Lies, there's not the kind of uplifting joy, I think, that you feel. So in some ways, I mean, this is actually what is different for me about this movie is that, first of all, it was the most fun I've ever had making a film. She was absolutely hilarious and provocative and fun to be around in the midst of dying. So that was, which in my other films have not been, even, Belly Talkers being a comedy type of or about comedy film. This was truly the most lived joy that I've experienced making a movie.
I think now it's interesting when you talk about That Way Madness Lies, because I remember when I talked to you about it and you said, "What do you think?" Like so far, but for me, it had such a sense of. It was almost like a sort of Hitchcockian adventure where you don't know where it's going. You don't know the whole story. There's a lot of mystery. You have a protagonist on this journey. And it was really a kind of, to me, kind of fabulous for that. I really enjoyed that. And I didn't get like a downbeat sense, although it ended, obviously it was very sad. There's a lot of sad moments in it. I just thought, wow, life is exciting. Life can be exciting. And
wow. I have to tell you, that is a singularly unique take on that film. That's the first time I have ever heard it put that way, which is interesting because there were a lot of hilarious moments in just how bizarre the situation was. Yes. that I couldn't include in the film because I felt like it infringed on the dignity of my brother.
Mm-hmm.
And me as the filmmaker having, and also being the adversary in the film. Mm-hmm. I had to be very, very careful because, humor is about pushing and provoking and, and often crossing that line. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't do it for a variety of reasons. Yeah. So I'm thrilled that you found. I mean, it was. I mean, I'm sure that it's much more fun to watch than it was to live through.
Yes, that's the sense I'm getting now as you're talking about it. The sort of observers, to me, it was just like a marvel because I didn't have to go through any of it. I didn't have to endure and work things out and all the incredible problems. I could just sort of marvel. And as you're watching it, because you kind of watch it as a movie, I had a sort of sense the narrative's going to work out. Like things will normalize in some way.
Wow, Eve! Wow, that's fascinating to me.
It was a really enjoyable film. But I was going to ask you that sense of, this is my other pre-written question, was which is leading me on to the sense of responsibility in portraying people. So as a documentary filmmaker, you're in a weird world where you're trying to be fictional, you're trying to be entertaining, you're trying to get a narrative going, right, and you're trying to shape reality in an engaging way. But then also you've got humans there, so there's parts of things which you omitted for your brother because you're conscious of how you represent your brother. Does that impact your other films? Were there other such things where you thought, I'm not going to show this?
Every single moment, absolutely. And I mean, there is an African, I believe it's an African culture that believes that taking a photograph of them is stealing their soul. Mm-hmm. And I believe that, there's a certain truth to that, I think. And so instead of thinking about it as stealing their soul, I mean, consent is everything. And then once you have that consent, you have to feel like you are carrying their soul around in, in your hand like this, but it's liquid. And so you have to be very careful about what you choose, how you choose to go forward, how you choose to, what happens if you spill some of it. It's not a profession it's not a profession for the consciously, for someone who's conscious of what you're actually doing. And it's certainly not a profession for the faint of heart. In that,
and you've got to have such a keen mind for sort of distinguishing the proper and the improper, which I think might be a very tough thing for a lot of people.
What's really hard for me is, and this is sort of my Achilles heel, is that I don't like people being mad at me. I mean, I tolerate it because I think that one has to, but I work so hard to be on the up and up with everything that I'm doing, is that when I do that and people still end up getting mad at me, and look, I've never made a film that I haven't been threatened to be sued.
That's a good line.
But yes, I mean, I wear that with a point of pride, because it also means that I don't, I don't kowtow to other people's, I really follow my heart and follow my vision of what I want to do, with that sense of ethical responsibility. But, like even, in this film that you just saw of Vanishing a Love Story, there's, what looks like a very familial, cohesive group of people having Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, they were really, because Kai wanted them to. Kai did not tell them that I was going to be there for that Thanksgiving. She was dying, so they felt like they couldn't take their anger out on Kai. And so I'm the one who, was the recipient of, I mean, they locked me out of the house at times. It was cold in Oregon on Thanksgiving.
Oh
And with the exception of one or two people, they've all come around now that they've seen the film. And I certainly got permissions from all of them. So, that, and some of them claim that they signed those consent forms under duress because Kai had insisted that they did.
God, that's a whole grey area and a complicated. I don't do well with that kind of pressure. I'm trying to imagine operating with that sort of pressure on you. And I read like when people write about documentary in sort of more activist mode, they say that it's not activism unless there's an element of risk involved. So if there's nothing to lose, it's not worth anything. It's just performance. But if there is an element of personal risk in some way, whether it's reputational or legal, I guess as well, then it's doing something. So I think that's like a really strong,
That's a very good way of thinking about it, because I mean, I just sort of, my blanket statement is I like to think of myself as an artisan portraiturist, because they're all about people first and foremost. I don't consider myself a message filmmaker. But I think that the way that you put it is that element of risk really, that can include a message film or an activism film.
And I think they, for me, they do step into that world. So, I mean, you have mental health, and you have the sort of institutional issues in That Way Madness Lies. And then also there's all sorts of end-life debates going on in Europe and in the UK right now. So I think your film is saying something, on that.
I'll tell you a very quick story, is that, in New York State, well, first of all, I have to tell you this, let me just put this into context. Kai promised me that she would haunt me. And she meant that in the very best way.
It's lovely.
Yeah, it is lovely, actually. And so of course that, I wanted her, if I was going to be haunted, I wanted the film to please her so that the hauntings would be good. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the idea of medical aid in dying, otherwise known as death with dignity, has been in the New York legislative branch for about 10 years, trying to get the bill through. The bill had finally got through, and then they did not know whether or not the governor was going to sign it into law. And nobody knew what her take and her opinion of it was. And they were worried because she is a Catholic, and they thought that maybe she wouldn't sign it. So it was going back and forth. And then they thought that maybe she was going to run out the clock. And everything was very tense. So on December 17th, my birthday, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she signed the law into practice. And she did something that she's never done before. She wrote a letter. Oh, I should mention, I did send her the film. I have no idea whether or not she saw it. I have no idea. But it was signed on my birthday. So I think somebody had a hand somewhere. And then furthermore, she wrote a letter, an open letter to her constituents, her New Yorkers, that basically said the reason that, even though she's Catholic, the reason that she signed it into law is because her mother died of ALS. And she did not want anyone to have to go through that kind of pain who didn't need to.
Which is what Kai
had. Yeah. So I can't say for a fact that that it was my film, but I kind of do believe that maybe Kai had a hand in it.
Sometimes in life, when there's enough pieces there, you can see what happened. The pieces are definitely there. I think that's fascinating. Sandra, I only had one more of my pre-written questions to ask you, and it was just about film industry. We were talking about the dreaded AI earlier. So I just want to ask you, documentary film industry, from your experience of it, is it changing? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? I know you have Odeja Films. Am I saying it right?
It's Ojeda.
Ojeda?
Ojeda, yeah. That's my mother's maiden name, and was Ojeda. My uncles, their little 8mm home movie company was called Ojeda Films. So I'm Ojeda Films' second generation.
Oh, that's so nice. I was going to ask you the name. So that's your film company. So how do you find, getting, I guess, raising money, distributing? Is like YouTube is a thing now, and there's people just churning out documentary-like content. I wouldn't say it's always like documentary proper, but they're just putting it out there, not really thinking about maybe they're using algorithms and engagement to try and distribute and raise awareness. Is that a world that you think competes with you, or are you firmly in the sort of cinemas and you have a system? Like, where do you start, when you've got your next movie?
I think of myself, and I think of the industry. Well, I think that William Goldman, who wrote Adventures in the Screenwriting Trade, said it the best. The opening line of his book is "Nobody knows anything," and I think that is absolutely true. Technology is changing all the time. I mean, if you think about the idea that we thought that photography was going to replace painting, it didn't. People were worried that the motion, that television was going to take away the cinemas. It didn't. It changed it. It influenced it. Change is inevitable, and we are living in a changing time. We don't know what the future holds. That's part of the joy and part of the horror of being a human being. And I think of my filmmaking practice. I'm kind of a kitchen sink cook. It's like, I sort of throw everything into the kitchen sink and try to make something of value or nutritious out of that. I think the same thing about my filmmaking. I mean, fundraising has been and always will be brutally difficult. And what cracks me up a lot is people often saying to me, "What? This last film cost $900,000? I mean, you weren't paying the actors. Where does the money go?" And the fact that I shot it on my iPhone. I mean, a very tricked out iPhone, I will admit, but an iPhone nonetheless. And so people were like, well, you didn't pay for camera rental. I mean, what's going on? But on the other hand, I mean, there's a cost benefit ratio, right? You shoot on an iPhone, you do have to make certain concessions, and you pay for it in the back end in post. So I think that, I mean, I like things that are handmade. That's why I consider myself an artisan portraiturist. So, but that's just my way of working. If I would drive myself crazy following every single trend that is going on. I don't know. The last film I had distributed was distributed by First Run Features, which is a very, sort of boutique distribution company here in New York. It's been around for ages. I don't know how I'm going to distribute this new one. And I'm doing a lot of research, and and sending it out. I know that I'm going to hire though an impact producer, which I wish I had done on Madness, but this is I'm learning as I go.
An impact producer. So are they someone that like gets you visibility in different ways?
Yes. So they basically produce the films, educational, and make it visible to groups that would be interested in it. So I mean, obviously with Vanishing, you're looking at people with death with dignity, you're looking at hospice care, you're looking at end of life issues. ALS doesn't seem to be that interested at the moment, because ALS research is really, they want to see movies of people who are pushing to the end to get more money into research. They don't want to, I mean, I've had ALS organizations say, yeah, but Kai gives up. So, it's not really something we want to represent ALS. I'm like, really? It is a 100% terminal disease, people.
There isn't a huge amount of ALS movies, I don't think. It's not like an established genre.
I mean, here's the thing is that everybody, and thankfully everybody, has an opinion and approach. And in some ways, I don't want my movies to be for everybody. And if somebody doesn't like, although I did love at a screening in New Haven, I had protesters, and they were called Progressives Against Medical Aid in Dying. And I thought, this is, I mean, I welcomed them. I introduced them to the reporters and who were there, because it's the conversation that the film is eliciting that is important here. I wanted to hear what they had to say. I invited them in. I was like, come in, watch the film, and then tell me what's wrong with it.
I love that. I love hearing even myself, like, opposing opinions. Always welcome.
I had a really great high school debate coach who said to me, if you cannot argue both sides of an issue, you don't understand it.
Yeah, makes sense. That's so interesting. So what is your next project? Is it too early to say?
No. Have I told you about this? Are you asking a question?
Maybe it's in here.
So I guess one would call it an environmental film, but it's not really. During the COVID lockdown, I spent a lot of time in Wood Hill Park here in my neighborhood, and I encountered this giant eastern cottonwood tree. And it became, during the lockdown, the only living thing I touched for 6 months. And I developed a relationship with this tree, and spent so much time with it, and started thinking about where the land that it was on, the things the changes that it had seen throughout its approximately 160-year life, who owned it, who lived by it. And so, for example, it ended up being on the property of Isidore and Ida Strauss. Isidore and Ida Strauss were the founders of Macy's. They were also the people that died together in the Titanic. And, and so Because she got into the lifeboat with her maid. They were then going to give him a moment in the lifeboat with give him a moment, put him in the lifeboat as well, because he was 65 years old and considered an old man. And he said, no, I'm a man of honor. Until every woman and child are on the boats, I will not get in. And his wife said, you're not getting in? Well, I've lived so long with you, I cannot live without you. She got out of the boat. She gave her her fur coat to her maid, and they died together. They were last seen on the rail of the Titanic as it went down. And and to think, like, this tree knew those people personally. And so sort of, I mean, and like any relationship, sort of getting to know somebody's history and somebody's background, and so that's basically this is going to be a short. It's not going to be feature length, but this is going to be a short. So that's what the new one's about.
It's wonderful. It's a different direction. It's and the history, that sense of history, and it's almost theatrical. The real history. That's wonderful. Okay, Sandra, thank you very much for answering my questions, and I'm going to talk to you.
More than welcome. Edit at will, okay?
I will.